Hello, I'm Meghann Scully and welcome to Re-Energise, a show that looks at sustainability in all its forms and what we can do to shape a clean energy future. On this episode, we're looking at the story of Ardnacrusha, the hydroelectric power station on the River Shannon in County Clare. It was constructed 100 years ago and was well ahead of its time, harnessing renewable energy to supply almost all of Ireland's electricity needs at the time. Not bad for a country that had only just achieved independence. How can we take lessons from this project and shape Ireland's energy future? I'm here with producer Connor.
Hi, Meghann.
And we had a great guest on this episode, Dr. Paul Deane, Senior Lecturer in Clean Energy Futures at University College Cork.
So, Meghann, this was a great episode. I loved how infectious Paul's enthusiasm for all of this was. I have to say, I didn't really know a huge amount about Ardnacrusha. Did you? Or
Well, I lived in Limerick for years, so I was well aware of where it was and I know the area. But yeah, I actually wasn't really sure what they did. I just knew it was something to do with the water.
yeah, I was basically, that's where I was at. It's, it's a power station that, but it has this really interesting history. It's 100 years old and it's so connected to kind of ESB and electricity and just renewable energy and everything as well.
And we were so ahead of our time, which is so cool to see. And I think, we can learn so much from it. But as well, I did really like the fact that he was like, we want this to be boring. We want, talking about energy and electricity should be boring.
Yeah, that was great. It's like, if everyone thinks this is boring, then no one's thinking about it. And that's great. So, yeah, I think just that nice kind of story of Ireland's energy from when Ardnacrusha was built until now kind of... it's had so many twists and everything else, and you kind of do need to understand it to look at, where we're going to go next.
As you can probably tell, Connor and I really enjoyed learning this story about Ardnacrusha, so now it's time that you get to hear it as well. We'll get straight into it, so Paul. Ardnacrusha, I used to live in Limerick, so I am very aware of where it is, and I probably don't really know what it does, so hopefully you'll be able to explain that to us because it's coming up to 100 years since Ardnacrusha.
It's a remarkable story, isn't it? Like what I love about the Ardnacrusha story is it's kind of it's a huge building, but it's a testament to what we can do, what we have done, and what we could do, and if you roll the clock back 100 years, right, Ireland was very different, a very poor country, very different. Of course, electricity wasn't anything substantial around the place, and most of our energy at that time actually came from things like peat, a natural resource. We used to import a bit of coal, so really reliant on fossil fuels. And the government at the time then just realised that, hey, you know what, we've got this wonderful natural resource in our rivers. Why don't we try and harness that, maybe capture some of that? And at the time they looked around the world and Siemens were doing interesting things with hydroelectricity and the plan, it's a long story, but the plan to put a dam on the Shannon. And in its day it produced almost 100% of Ireland's electricity needs, which is remarkable, and it was a huge, brave project.
Yeah.
In my job, we often look at money and we look at these things, but in its day, about 25% of all the money that flowed through the economy at that time was invested in Ardnacrusha and was investing in a future.
Yeah.
It was investing in people, investing in an idea. And, for a young country, a young state at its time, it was a lovely arrival on the world stage. It was kind of, a level of maturity showing what small countries can do with big ideas, and really started Ireland's journey with electricity. And actually, the thing that's ironic now, if you roll the clock forward 100 years, right? We're kind of back now to being heavily reliant on fossil fuels. Ireland is still one of the most heavily fossil fuel reliant countries in Europe. About 80% of all the energy that we're using today to heat our homes, to drive our cars, our trucks, our electricity is fossil fuel, and it's imported. So often I think that echoes of the past about looking at our natural resources and moving away from fossil fuels are as relevant now as they were 100 years ago with Ardnacrusha.
It must have been an incredibly ambitious project because the size of it, for one, and even I'm just trying to even think of 100 years ago, how did they even build it?
Yeah, it was ambitious and brave, and the bravery really has something that has to be taken into account. They really took a chance. Number one, the size of the project for its time, we'd never done anything like that before. Getting the workforce, training people up, getting skills, getting machinery, getting access to the location. It was a real testament, I suppose, to engineering to ingenuity, but I just admire the courage, the can-do attitude. That was really prevalent back then. And it wasn't just buying into an idea that had at that time. It was buying into the future. They knew that electricity was essential for modern economies to grow because it gave us security or gave us our own energy. It allowed people to raise our standards of living, right? Because with electricity, you can keep food cool, right? So things like fridges and cooking and all these things that electricity enabled lifted a lot of people out of very hard and difficult lives and made life a lot easier for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Made life difficult, I suppose, in many ways for some people, but it was a kind of a key to economic growth and industrial growth in Ireland as well. And this is one of the things, I guess, with electricity. We often think about electricity as being about, pylons and power lines and cables. It's not. It's about people, and that's what I love about the story of energy. When you scratch at the surface and look beyond the kind of the engineering, the economics, there's people and there's stories there of communities that are thriving because of the energy that they had access to because of that. And culturally, the cultural changes that electricity brought, having lights in houses was a remarkable thing that people didn't have back in the day, lighting street lamps and stuff like that, cooking and cleaning and all of these things that we all take for granted now. 100 years ago, we didn't have. And that little spark of ingenuity that Ardnacrusha gave us was kind of the start of that wave that often, leads us to this wonderful life that we have today.
So you're saying there now it's that was 100% of how Ireland was.
Close enough, yeah. We used to burn a lot of turf as well at that time, more later. And actually, I love history, right? So we used to, in the 1930s and 1940s, so Ireland, we built a couple of more hydro stations making electricity from rivers. And we built a couple of more peat-fired power stations because they were our resources. That's what we had, and we didn't know about gas or renewables or all these things back then, even though rivers, of course, do produce renewable energy. But a strange thing happened then over the 40s and 50s, maybe in the late 30s as well, is that we started to get a couple of unusual weather years. We got a couple of really wet years, a couple of wet summers, which unfortunately happen, all right? And what that did was it really disrupted the turf harvest, the peat harvest, because you get a wet summer, you can't harvest the turf, but the wet summers gave more hydroelectricity. And then we had a couple of drought years where that was really bad for the hydroelectricity, but really good for the turf. So people were kind of saying, geez, we have this kind of seesaw, we have this kind of, and some years it worked well and other years it didn't work well, but it really brought more attention to energy security because the government then in the 50s and 60s started to think about, well, oh, crikey, what's going to happen now if we get, we get a couple of more really dry years? That'll really impact us in hydro. And what if we get more wet summers? And we did, they came every so often. So the government then in the 60s and 70s started to think more about diversification, and we started our age of oil for electricity. And oil served us well for a couple of decades. We started opening up more electricity-fired power stations burning oil. And of course, all that oil was different to the peat and hydroelectricity because it came from abroad. Mainly came from the Middle East. And then, of course, you have the in the end of the 70s and early 80s, you have the successive oil crises where oil was available, but the price went through the roof. And at that time, Ireland has started to build more and more fossil fuel generation using oil more and more. And of course, when the price of oil went up, the price of electricity went up. And then that really reduced economic opportunities in Ireland. So we started to move away from our own resources. We relied more on external suppliers to give us things like oil. And then when we hit the crises, prices went up. And then that posed the question again. It said, well, we're not so worried now about, wet summers or dry summers. And now we're worried about international geopolitics. We're worried about the price of fossil fuels going up. And that's kind of where we're back to today, We don't generate an awful lot of electricity anymore from hydroelectricity. We don't generate any electricity from peat. We don't generate any electricity anymore from oil. We generate most of our electricity now from natural gas. And then we saw what happened with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And most of that natural gas that we burn in power plants in Ireland comes from abroad. So when the price goes up, the cost of the gas goes up, cost of electricity goes up. So it's almost like Back to the Future. We're worried about the same things that we were worried about back in the 80s and the 70s and the 40s and the 50s. And a key concern there that's always evolving is where do we get our energy from? How can we control the price of it? How can we control the sources of it? And unfortunately, those questions which we tried to address with Ardnacrusha 100 years ago have just expanded, got bigger, more difficult, and are as relevant today as they were a century ago.
So what can we do then, or what is the option?
Yeah, I guess, we often get very excited about the future and think about, it's often very tempting and compelling to think about wonderful, exotic technologies like new nuclear technologies or whatever. But actually, the answer is looking back and looking under our noses, essentially. Looking back to what we did 100 years ago is looking at our own natural resources that we have here in Ireland. Because the wonderful thing about fuels that you produce yourself is that you have them. You control the price to a certain extent. They're relatively secure because they're not subject to external interference, let's say. And Ireland has got a couple of options there, right? We could, we can't go back to burning peat because we know it's very bad for people in terms of the health impacts of poor air pollution, and it's very bad for the planet as well. People say to me, well, Paul, why don't we just go drilling for oil and gas off the coast of Ireland? And we've actually tried that, okay? Yeah. So we've drilled for oil and gas about 140 or so different wells over the last 30 or 40 years. We've never found commercial oil, so that's a pretty poor hit rate. And we've only found gas at a commercial level maybe 3 or 4 times, 4 times exactly, and 2 of those were down in Kinsale. So we've tried that. We've tried looking under the ground for energy. But what about looking above the ground, right? We can now generate huge amounts of electricity from things like wind turbines and solar, using sunlight and wind. And we have these things in abundance in Ireland. I know, for solar, right, that mightn't always feel that it's in abundance, right? But it's there. And it's an incredible resource, right? It's ours, it's secure, it's indigenous. It can't be interfered with geopolitically. And actually, if you kind of look at the plans that the Irish government have, which are incredibly ambitious, and we're probably not going to achieve them by 2030, but we'll probably get there a bit afterwards. The amount of electricity that we could generate from things like sunlight and wind, if we achieve the government targets for 2030, is like finding 3 brand new Corrib gas fields. Wow. Now imagine if we woke up in the morning and the front of the Sun or the Irish Times was Ireland discovers 3 new Corrib gas fields. Like, the place would go, they wouldn't be shouting at each other, they'd be singing around dancing, And we often forget that we've got this, we look underground and we look far away, but the key to Ireland's energy future is all around us. It's in the wind that blows over this wonderful island, it's in our oceans, it's in our land. It's in our sunlight. And we know, part of the research that we do down in UCC, we kind of crunch the numbers on this kind of stuff, and we know there's enough there to meet our energy needs in a secure and affordable way, right? That's really good. And not just to power our appliances like our laptops and our gadgets and all our phones, but there's enough to power our cars and our trucks and our businesses and our farms and our firms and heat our homes, Now that sounds wonderful. But here's the catch, right? There's always a catch in these things. It's going to take time. It's going to take 20 or 30 years because we're starting from a point that's really far back. So we're starting from the point where we're one of the most fossil fuel reliant economies in Northwest Europe, where 80% of all the stuff that goes into our cars, our homes, our appliances is fossil fuel. So changing that takes time. But again, when you look back to Ardnacrusha, they knew it was going to take time. They knew this wasn't a short, sharp project. It was an idea that invested in a future. And what I loved about the Ardnacrusha idea, they weren't selling the idea of electricity, or they weren't selling the idea of emissions or environmentalism. They were selling a vision of an Ireland that was just better than the future that we have today. And I love that, and they got the GA clubs involved, they got the churches involved at its time, and I think that's what we're missing from today. We can talk all about the environmental stuff that's all correct and valid and precise, but actually when I think about the future of energy in Ireland, and I think about just producing more of our own stuff here in our own country, with our own people, with our own fuels from our own resources, you just see in Ireland that's better. So is there a chance then that could we see more Ardnacrusha style hydro energy places going up around Ireland? Or? No, I don't think so. I think, Ireland is kind of peculiar from an energy perspective, right? Because we've got lots of water falling on us every single day, but we have very limited ability to produce useful electricity from it. Okay. So countries like Norway are very different. Norway has got a lot of snow and rain that falls there, but they've got these huge mountains. So to make a lot of electricity from water, you need two things. You know, in a country like Ireland, you need water, which we have, but you need height, which we don't have. You know, because you need that water flowing either at a significant volume or a significant flow rate. So I think the day of the large water projects are gone in Ireland and in most European countries, actually. That was kind of the low-hanging fruit. Now, that's not to say that I think there's some nice opportunities for small local communities for small hydro projects. Even though the amount of electricity that they produce will be relatively small, it's the impact that they tend to have in terms of just taking ownership of your own stuff. They tend to have an outsized impact on the kind of the courage that they give people. So I think the day of the large Ardnacrusha projects are gone. And the thing that is kind of certainly most obvious for Ireland now at the moment is onshore wind farms. You know, traveling around the country, we see lots of wind farms, solar farms. And then I suppose the big kind of jewel in the crown and the one that we need to work hard at is offshore wind farms. And that's important because the last energy crisis that we went through in Ireland, actually the last energy crisis was 3 years ago, and unfortunately we're still kind of in the shadows of that. But my parents, my mum and dad, for example, would have gone through the energy crisis in the 70s and 80s. And Ireland went through that crisis, and it was almost an existential crisis because we realised that, jeepers, we're using a load of oil to generate electricity, and we don't have any oil. So what do we do? And they looked around at different things. And actually, if you look at the ESB archives, you kind of say that they looked at things like wind and solar, even back in the 70s and 80s, but it just cost way too much. It was just, so that's why we looked at coal and we looked at nuclear as an option, and we went for coal, and we built Money Point actually back in the 1980s. But what has changed since that energy crisis is that now we have technologies that can really capture the wind, then capture the sunlight, and to produce electricity at an affordable cost. And what renewables offer us is not so much cheap electricity. They offer affordable electricity. And I mean affordable, it's kind of a little bit lower than what we're paying today, but it reduces volatility. It allows us to plan. So if you're someone setting up a business and you're using a lot of electricity, or setting up a school or an enterprise, at least you'll know that, oh, right, for the next 10 or 15 years, I won't have to worry so much about my electricity bill because I know the cost is going to be this. And you can kind of say, well, I can bank that cost now and I can not worry about it. And I think that's the prize that we should be striving for in Ireland. Because if you have certainty, you know, in business or in community, you can plan. You know, there's still going to be tons of problems, right? But if we get this right, hopefully electricity just won't be one of them.
Yeah, because I've even noticed now, even just walking around, all the solar units now get up on houses and individual houses. Yeah. So, like, you know, it's becoming, like, everyone's buying into it and everyone knows that it's the future. And I've spoken to people with electric cars and they said, well, sure, my solar panels pay for the electricity for the car.
Yeah, it's everywhere, you know. And like I always say to my students down in Cork, you know, like big oil companies and big gas companies, they used to have to worry about, you know, people who wanted to save the planet. People like myself who put on the woolly jumper and go shouting and roaring, like, you know. But now they have to worry about people who want to save money. Right, because people who want to save money see things like electric cars. You know, if you have a regular petrol or diesel car, you're going to spend 1,300, 1,400 euros a year on petrol or diesel. If you've the equivalent electric car, you're going to spend 300 or 400 euros a year. If you're heating your house with an electric heat pump, for example, you're not going to be paying 1,000 to 1,200 euros a year on oil. You're going to be paying 400, 500 euros a year on electricity. Now, the cost of that kit is still expensive. Electric cars is coming down quickly. Heat pumps, we have a long way to go there yet. But people who want to save money are making the smarter choices, and they're moving to electricity, moving away from fossil fuels. And that's a great thing, because a side consequence of that is that you're doing things that are good for your pocket, but they're also good for the planet, right? It's also less pollution, significantly less pollution from electric cars and from home heating. So that's really changed, I suppose, in the last 3 or 4 years, and that's remarkable. And things that were kind of seen as exotic and kind of, you know, for the hippies and for the tree huggers, you know, you know, the hippies and tree huggers, they were right. You know, this stuff makes sense, you know, and that's what's changed in the last number of years. Renewables aren't just about Ireland meeting our European targets or climate targets. It's about delivering a better economy. And when you can deliver a better economy, you can have a better society. Mm-hmm. A better society means more opportunities for people, better well-being, better health outcomes. You know, and we often forget in Ireland our reliance on fossil fuels isn't great for us as a people either. We have about 1,300 people who will die prematurely in Ireland this year just because of poor air quality, and that's primarily linked to pollution from fossil fuels and things like burning peat and things like burning timber. So if you move away from fossil fuels, you increase health outcomes, because most of our energy comes from abroad. Most of the people who produce it are working abroad. But if we produce more energy here, more jobs here, right? And we spend a crazy amount of money on energy. If I don't like throwing in too many numbers into these type of things, but let me give you one round number that's easy to digest. We spend about €1 million every hour on fossil fuels in Ireland, right? It's crazy, right? And we think of ourselves as green, so €1 million every hour that we spend on petrol and diesel and home heating, oil and gas for electricity. And that's €1 million that leaves this country and goes to companies in UK, Norway, US, Azerbaijan, etc. If we're able to produce our own energy, we'd still be spending €1 million, okay? Let's not, let's not go all Disneyland on this. But it's €1 million that stays in Ireland. That stays in our communities. It circulates within the economies.
It kind of makes me excited now for the future, because I think the way you speak about it, you don't speak about it in a kind of a scary, you must do this way. It just actually, when you put it into the perspective of the person, it actually makes more sense. And there's a quote that always sticks to me. It's like, keep your business in town, keep your town in business. And I think it is hugely important, and it'll just create a nice environment for all of us.
It is, and like when I look around, like say the farming community at the moment, and I live in rural West Cork, and have some incredible farmers around. And they're really afraid of the future because there's no vision for farming in Ireland, right? And it's different if you're living in a town or a city, or if you're an academic like myself. I can imagine my future where I have solar panels and I scoot around in my electric car or a bike, and that's safe, and I know, and I can buy into that future. But what if your future, you've been told that, well, you won't have a job, or your kids won't have a job, or we don't need you? That's very fearful, and that's not helpful. It drives people away, and I think using our land in clever ways, producing our food in good ways and better ways, and giving farmers options, I think, rather than taking away their choices, again, is really important. And it comes back to that idea of, like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Is it a story of fear and a dystopian future, or is it something you can strive for? And we love, and I think we strive for compelling visions and stories that make us better, that make our communities better. And I think that's what's missing in farming and in energy at the moment, because the doom and the gloom, I think we're all just jaded from it. We're very comfortable with catastrophe, and we just disengage. And it's much easier to believe that climate change isn't real than to accept that your future is compromised, And again, that spirit of Ardnacrusha, and just a vision for the future that we can all work towards. And here's the crazy thing, we can actually achieve it, right? We don't need any kind of magic technologies. There's a couple of things we have to crack around storage and all this other stuff, but we've no excuses. And it's exciting. And although I'm always careful with the word exciting, I think when people talk about the future being very exciting, really you want the future of energy to be boring, right? Because you want people to forget about it, right? You want to get up in the morning and just not care about your electricity bill. You want to hop into a car, get into a box and it moves. You want your house to be warm. You want to forget about it, right? And the best policies are the ones that are invisible to people, that people forget about, right? If we rewind the clock back 10 years ago when, the ESB bill or the electricity bill came in the door, and some people mightn't have opened it, some people mightn't have looked at it. So you want to get energy to a stage where people forget about it, that it's not on the headlines, and it just becomes part and parcel. You want our health system to be like that as well. You want our education system. We don't want to see it on the headlines, because if it's not on the headlines, it means it's working and people have forgotten about it.
We've been discussing now, and it's been mentioned 2030. I think it's kind of the year that's thrown around a lot. But realistically, what can we achieve or not achieve? What are the obstacles that are holding us back? Ireland has got lots of targets for 2030. And no, let me be honest, we're probably going to miss most of them. Okay, that's unfortunate, but it's just the way things are. Why are we going to miss them? Well, one reason mainly, to give credit to the Irish government and to Irish policymakers, they're doing all the right things, actually. But we're just not doing things at a scale that's big enough or a speed that's quick enough. And my big worry is time. We've got lots of ambition. We've got lots of action. The country is full of investors and companies who want to make this transition. We've got the skills. We've got the technology.
But our Achilles heel in Ireland, I suppose our strength is our wonderful energy resource. Our weakness is we're just so slow. And it's not just in energy, across any kind of major infrastructure, across healthcare. Agility is our big challenge. We're great at talking about ambition. We're great at talking about action. But when it comes to agility and delivery, we're terrible. We're just too slow. It takes too long to do most things in Ireland. To build something, building wind farms, solar farms, can take up to a decade at times. So we're too slow. We saw kind of elements of this, I suppose, in COVID, and I know there's different perspectives on this, but we actually did some things fairly quickly and that surprised ourselves. So we need to surprise ourselves again with infrastructure and with energy and just hurry up with the delivery. But it's important to realise that it's our responsibility and it's our fault. The reason for missing our 2030 targets isn't because they were hoisted on us by some bureaucrat over in Brussels who doesn't know anything about Ireland. These are targets that we chose ourselves, and the responsibility for the lack of delivery needs to rest solely with the government, and we need to be better at that. Because if we keep on kicking the can down the road, we'll be back here in another 100 years' time talking about, well, at least we did Ardnacrusha 200 years ago, So agility is what I would request. If I had a magic wand and could make one wish for the energy transition in Ireland, it would be agility.
So that's it for this week's episode of Re-Energize. A huge thank you to our guest. Don't forget to subscribe and spread the word about the show. We'd love to generate some new listeners. We'll see you in 2 weeks for the next episode.
This podcast was produced and recorded by the Podcast Studios for ESB. Production and editing by Connor Reid. Project management by Katie Flannery. Original music by Dan Wilcox. Video editing by Judy Hassett. Graphics and design by Matt Mahon.